Hey folks, Mr. Dell here. We are looking at simplifying expressions that deal with fraction operations, adding and subtracting fractions and mixed numbers. So we're going to go through these questions. So this is coming from CPM's course 2, and this is section 6.1.1, specifically number 6-8. So it says simplify the following expressions. Here's my first one. So negative 3/4 minus 2/5. Right? So I'm taking and I have to subtract fractions. And in order to subtract fractions or add fractions, you have to have a common denominator, right? So if we look, this is subtraction, 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 addition, subtraction, and addition. So no matter what, every one of these, we've got to have a common denominator, right? So that means your bottom number has to be the same. So when we write a common denominator, we're looking for fractions that are equivalent to, say, 3/4, a fraction that's equivalent to 3/4. For example, over here, I'll just make a little note. So 3/4 is the same thing as 6/8, right? If I double the 3 and the 4, those are equivalent fractions. So I need to find an equivalent fraction that has a denominator that both 4 and 5 would go into, right? So what is that? Well, I usually just take those two numbers and either multiply them if I know that there's no other common factors. So 4 times 5 is 20. So what I want is I want the equivalent fraction to 3/4 that has a 20 as a denominator, right? So in order to do that, you basically take that fraction, in this case the 3/4, and multiply it by a giant 1 of 5/5. So 5/5, because why'd I choose 5/5? Because 5 times 4 is 20. So 3 times 5 is 15. So now my new fraction, instead of 3/4, I'm going to deal with 15/20. That is an equivalent fraction to 3/4. Those are the same numbers in a different form, right? So they are equivalent in value. And again, we got to remember the sign in front of that. So that's a negative 15/20 minus. So I'm going to take this 2/5 and I'm going to also multiply by some giant 1, so that way I get it to have a 20 in the denominator, right? So 4 times 5, 5 times 4 is 20. So my giant 1 would be 4/4. So 2 times 4 is 8. So the other fraction would be 8/20. So now I have 15/20, negative 15/20 minus 8/20. Well, when you're taking a negative number and you're subtracting positive, right, on a number line, what does that look like? So if I'm here at, here's my 0, and here I'm here at negative 15/20 on my number line, and I'm subtracting a positive, I'm going that direction, so it just gets more negative. So really what we're also doing, you could look at it as I'm adding these two negative numbers, right? So it's negative 15/20 plus negative 8/20. When you subtract a positive, it's the same thing as adding a negative. So then my final answer here would be negative 23rd. You add the numerators and the denominator stays the same. So that's the process of simplifying, getting your fraction to have common denominators and then adding them, subtracting them, whatever the operation is. So the first one's negative 23/20. Okay, so I'm going to go a little faster here. So for these, same thing. Once again, I got to get this 7/8 to have a denominator. I got to multiply by some giant 1 to get the denominator to be the same as the doing that to the 3, right? So this one here, the 2/3, I'm going to multiply that by some giant 1 to end up with the same denominator. Well, 8 times 3 is 24. So that's going to be I want 7/8 to be in the form of something over 24 as a 24th instead of as an 8th. So that's multiplying by the giant 1 of 3/3. So that becomes 21/24. And this would be the giant 1 of 8/8, right? And then that becomes 16/24. And it wants me just to subtract. And I'm subtracting 21. So this is where the subtraction comes in. 21 minus 16/24. So that gives me an answer of 5/24. Okay, 5/24. 21 minus 16 is 5, and then the 24, the denominator does not change. All right, we'll keep going. Here we have 1/3 minus 5/6. Well, I already have, this is a 5/6, so I really want this 1/3 to be something over 6. So we can see that 1/3 is the same thing as 2/6, right? If I multiply by the giant one of 2/2 and then minus 5/6. So 2/6 minus 5/6, well, I'm taking actually a small minus a big in this case. So it's really a negative 3/6, right? So you subtract the numbers and it's negative. Other way of looking at it would have been saying 2/6 plus negative 5/6, right? When you're subtraction, it's adding the opposite. And so that's negative 3/6, which actually simplifies to be negative 1/2. Okay. Now we'll get into some mixed numbers. So with the mixed numbers, depending upon the mixed number, this one, I'm going to actually convert that into a single fraction, right? 1 is the same thing as 3/3. So we could actually look at this as 3/3 plus 2/3, right? 1 is 3/3. So that's why it's really 5/3 is this fraction as a single fraction is 5/3. The other way to look at it is the shortcut there is taking the denominator times the whole number plus the numerator, and that's your new numerator. So 3 times 1 plus 2 is 5. So that's why it's 5/3. This one here is already a single fraction. So now I'm wanting to take 5/3 plus negative 2/5. I've got to get a common denominator. So I'm going to change those denominators to be over 15. So 5/3 as a 15th would be multiplying by the giant one of 5/5. Right? So 5 times 3 is 15. 5 times 5 is 25. So now I have 25 plus, and then negative what? Negative, I got to do the same thing. Make this to have an equivalent fraction with a 15. So let's multiply by the giant one of 3/3. So that becomes negative 6/15. Those two right there combined, actually you have a positive 25, a negative 6. You subtract those numbers and you'll get 19. So my final answer would be 19/15. And I can leave it as a single fraction, or I could have wrote it as 1 4/15 if you wanted to write it as a mixed number. Okay. All right, we'll keep going. This one I have two single fractions, 4/7 minus a negative 3/8. My denominator in this case is going to be 56 because that's 7 times 8. That's the least common multiple. And so that would be multiplied by a giant one of 8/8. So my new numerator would be 32. This one would be multiplied by 7/7 as a giant one, and that would be 21/56. And what we're doing is we're subtracting a negative. What happens when you subtract a negative? It all becomes just addition, right? It's minus a negative. So adding the opposite changes it all to be adding a positive. So those two add up to be 55/56. And the last one, 1/2 and 1/9. So I want that. And this time I'm not going to change these to single fractions. I'm going to see if I can do this as mixed numbers and show you that. So this, I want it to be negative 4 and something over 18, right? 1/2 as an 18th would be 9/18. 9/18 is 1/2. And I'm choosing 18 because that's my common denominator. So plus 3. So 1/9 is 2/18. Would multiply top and bottom by 2. The giant one of 2. So when I'm dealing with a negative number and a positive number, you really subtract. You're saying that minus that. So that becomes 1, and then 9 minus 2 is 7. So it's 1 and 7/18. But there's more negative, so it's a negative 1 and 7/18. All right, there we go.